Good evening and welcome to QandA. I'm Tony Jones and here to answer your questions tonight, the head of the Australian Council of Social Services, Cassandra Goldie. The Liberal member for Mackellar, Jason Falinski. Independent MP, Zali Steggall, who toppled former Prime Minister Tony Abbott. The Shadow Minister for Finance, Katie Gallagher, and the Economics Editor for the Australian newspaper, Adam Crichton. Please welcome our panel. Thank you very much. Q&A is live in Eastern Australia on ABC TV, iView and News Radio. We've got plenty of great questions tonight. Our first one comes from the audience, from Ricky Bartels. Ricky.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to ask a question that's very near and dear to me. I have paid taxes for 46 years, you might be able to tell. I've worked 20 years in the private sector and 26 years in the public sector for a not-for-profit community service. At the age, I was forced onto Newstart at the age of 62 through change of management and subsequent retrenchment. I've experienced Newstart for over 3 years. Job active left me to my own devices. I could not find a job, no matter how hard I tried. So my question to you wonderful panellists is this. How would you suggest people like me have a go to get a go?
Jason Falinski, we'll start with you.
Thank you, Tony. Firstly, can I say that's an extraordinary story and I'm sorry you've had to go through that. I don't know enough about your personal circumstances to be able to properly comment on it, and nor would I presume to know your life. We have done a number of things in the government to try and make sure that our system, which is a $172 billion welfare system per annum, is as bespoke as possible and responds to the needs of individuals as much as possible. It may be in your particular case we haven't been as successful as we need to be. But we keep trying. Australia has a very successful welfare and tax and transfer system in this country. It's one of the reasons that we have very high income levels, high income mobility levels, and very low levels of income inequality, especially compared with other OECD nations. So I'm happy to talk to you after the show, but...
Well, we're going to talk a little bit on the show. That's one of the great things about having questioners here in front of you. I'll quickly go back to Ricky. First, a quick response to what Jason is saying. And can you give us some idea of how you lived for 3 years on the sum that Newstart offered you to live on?
Well, put it in a nutshell, it's the worst time of my life. The loss of dignity. The loss of friends because you can't go out, you can't socialise. Not eating proper foods even though I suffer various ailments. Looking for a job, applying for a job, not getting the job. There were 3 occasions where I got a small project job in community service. I'm a very skilled person. I've been a manager for settlement services for quite a long time. So for me, it was the worst time of my life. And Jason, with respect, you haven't answered my question. What do you suggest? People like me, at my age, or at a young age for that matter, you know, how do they have a go to get a go? This is so important. Have a go, get a go. It's so divisive.
Tony?
Yeah, sure.
Ricky, look, I can't tell you how... I don't know enough about your life circumstances to comment. All I can say is that we as a government are doing as much as we possibly can to create a system that allow people to get as quickly from welfare to work as possible. We have a very highly targeted welfare system in this country. It has been very successful at ensuring that poverty levels and inequality are kept low. If the system has failed you personally in your particular circumstances, I can only apologise for that. I'd love to know more, and we'd love to create a system that is that makes sure that what has happened to you doesn't happen to
OK,
others.
let's hear from Cassandra Goldie. Have you heard stories like this before, and how typical is that case?
Ricky, great to see you here this evening. And I know that there are other people in the audience who also know exactly what it's like. And want to say to you, Jason, it is not everybody's story is unique, but at the same time, there is a huge problem with our social security system. And in case you hadn't heard it, just about everybody else in the country agrees that New Start is unbearable. It is not working, and it desperately needs to be increased to something that's livable after over 25 years of not having been increased in real terms. And it's an absolute travesty that we, as one of the wealthiest countries in the world, have refused to do what a good government would do so far. But I've got to say tonight, what has been very encouraging, Zali, good on you, sister. You said New Start needed to be increased. The Country Women's Association says that the New Start payment needs to be increased. The Australian Medical Association, all of the business groups, the union movement, the leading economists, Adam, you too. Yeah? says that New Start must be increased.
You left out John Howard.
John Howard. Of course, there are politicians across the political spectrum, and the tide is only going in one direction, to get this change that's so desperately needed. Can I say it's been so important. For too long, people have felt really silenced by this. There's a lot of shaming that goes on, isn't there, Ricky, you know? When this happens to you, and it happens to young people.
So can I just say, I think that
but more and more people
Ricky
speaking up.
Ricky was just going to make a point there. Go ahead.
Yeah, the mental strains. You know, I was a frontline worker. I did conferences. I spoke at conferences. I wrote papers. And as you can see, I've lost my nerves now, and I'm quite happy to speak. But your confidence goes zip. When everything in your life that you've cherished, and I want it to work till I'm 70, I love the work I did. And I took jobs, still in the sector, but not managerial. I was quite prepared that I may have to make adjustments. In other words, I believe not only have I had a go for 46 years, I believe I had a go on New Start, and I do not like hearing things like have a go to get a go. I do not like hearing things like this government will give, will only hand up, not hand out, only recently said by our Prime Minister. What is that supposed to mean? Am I a handout now?
Let's go back to Jason, and can I just put this to you? I mean, you might want to respond to that, but can I just put this to you? It's clear the government's trying to protect its surplus. So we've got the Prime Minister talking about unfunded empathy from the Labor Party. He's clearly worried about the money. If you get a surplus, will the situation change? Will the government raise New Start, as so many people have called for?
So, Ricky, can I firstly address the point that you made? No one in the government thinks that you're a handout. This government and this country has always been about ensuring that no matter where you come from, what the circumstances of your birth are, that you get a chance to live your life to its full potential. That is not to say that we are a perfect nation, because we're not. And there's a lot more that we can do to become a more perfect nation. And every government, regardless of who they are, is always trying to move their government, try to move the country in that direction.
So quick one, Jason, because I've got to hear from the other panellists. So just a quick one. What I just asked was about, if you get a surplus, will you raise New Start?
Well, what I would say to you, Tony, is I know that there are people on the left who try to characterise this as being about money. It's not. It's about saving lives. It's about moving people from welfare to work. And I'm happy to go through...
OK, well, so if John Howard is one of those people, I'm happy to be in that camp. But
Yeah, well, can I say, I am allowed to disagree.
Yeah.
I am allowed to disagree with John Howard.
OK.
I think on this is wrong.
Fair enough. Zali?
Look, I agree with the policy that we need to create opportunities and job opportunities to have to get off the welfare. But the welfare has to be at a level that you can live reasonably. You have to be able to still have that quality of life, a standard. You can't have it where it pushes people so low, and we talk about mental health issues and isolation, and if the rate is so low, which it's the lowest in OECD countries.
People are going without food every day.
It is just, I think it's embarrassing for us as a nation that we haven't addressed it and raised it. The irony is we've got an economy that's flatlining and it needs a boost, and we've addressed it with tax cuts and things that are coming into play. But the RBA has also come out saying that the boost of raising New Start would actually kickstart as well the economy and putting more funds into the system. So I think it has a multi-purpose, and it should be, I think, nearly bipartisan. There are people supporting it across the aisle, and I certainly...
Let's go to the other side of the aisle, to Katie Gallagher. And the Labor Party didn't have the courage to say we're going to raise New Start before the last election. You just said we're going to have an inquiry, which is, you could argue the coward's way out.
Well, I wouldn't characterise it that way. I mean, we're in opposition. You don't have the resources of government to actually get the information from the Treasury and from the Department of Social Security to actually pull together a submission that would allow you to make those decisions as a cabinet. You can't do that from opposition. I mean, you just don't have those resources.
You made a lot of promises from opposition, and that wasn't one of them.
Well, the promise from opposition was that we would have a review of New Start, and that was in recognition that we were getting representations from almost every sector of the community and the business community more broadly to have a look at it, and that it wasn't keeping pace with what people in the community needed. So our position was that, and I think Bill Shorten said at the time, you don't have a review to decrease a payment. The review was genuine. If we'd won the election, it would be well underway. We didn't. So our position is the government, this is firmly and squarely in the government's court. I think the language that's being used, and Ricky's sort of given us how that matters at a very human level. This language that the best form of welfare is a job, well, that's nice. But there's, 1.8 million unemployed and underemployed people in this country, and there's about 250,000 job vacancies. So, no matter how hard someone tries, that's going to be really difficult for them. I think the language is divisive. It's not the way Australia has developed in terms of having a safety net for people when they need it. 20 years ago, I went on a social security payment completely, out of the blue and without any fault of my own, not that that matters. And it gave me a safety net to allow myself to get myself together. And I think at this point in time, we're saying New Start doesn't provide that anymore. And the government needs to sort it. This is one of the benefits of winning an election. Get on with it.
Adam, as an economist, we heard Zali suggest that it would actually boost a flagging economy to increase New Start, because the money would go straight back into the economy at the retail level. What do you think?
Well, certainly it's likely that the extra welfare payments to people with very low incomes would likely be spent. So I do agree with that. Look, I mean, I don't. Neither side of politics basically has acted on this, and I think it's really embarrassing. I mean, you're sitting there, yet the Rudd-Gillard government was in for 6 years and they didn't really do anything about this. And to call to have a review, I mean, we might have the second lowest payment in the OECD, but we certainly have the most number of reviews of things. And I really think we need to stop the reviews and actually just act. I mean, you're quite right about you're really quite right about the number of jobs. The ABS said that there are 245,000 job vacancies in May. There's about 750,000 people on New Start. Of course, there's another 900,000 on the disability support pension. So I do think we need to recognise as a society that this idea of dole bludgers really is wrong. I mean, certainly some people on the payment will be lazy and they won't seek work, but I do think the large majority of them do seek work. And, you know, who wants to live on $280 a week? Not many people. It's not very pleasant. And so I do think that there's definitely a case. I mean, it was last raised in 1994. Now, in that time, a backbench MP's salary has gone up in real terms just under 100%, whereas the New Start payment has not increased at all. Now, that's just extraordinary.
I'm going to quickly... I'll give the last word on this to Ricky, since you raised the question. Imagine you're speaking now directly to the Prime Minister. What would you very briefly say to him?
Or do I have to? OK, Prime Minister, in your acceptance speech, you said that you would govern with compassion and strength and something else. But I focused on the words with compassion and strength. So I would like to say to Scott Morrison that you can be both compassionate and strong by increasing New Start. They actually work together. And there are a number of ways if Adam, he wants a review, and Labor wanted a review, you could have said, we'll raise it $25 or $50 now, and after the review, we'll see whether there could be raised more.
OK.
These things can happen.
Ricky, thank you very much for raising the question and for prosecuting the case. Thank you very much. The next question is from Iz Connell.
Oh, hello. Senate estimates has been told that the robo-debt program costs almost as much as it recovers, asks for money that isn't owed, and puts considerable stress on vulnerable people. Given the widespread criticism of this poorly targeted and designed debt recovery initiative, what will it take for the government to stop this disastrous program and focus their efforts on other, fairer methods of increasing government revenue?
OK, we'll keep this one a little briefer, but Jason, starting with you, it's in the government's...
Sure, absolutely. So I'm just going to be brief. There are other things in that Senate hearing as well. That $1.9 billion worth of debts have been recovered, that there are $4.58 billion worth of debt still outstanding, that if you want to have a $172 billion welfare system that is properly targeted and designed to get people out of back to work and living their lives as best they can, you need to have integrity in that system. You can't do that unless you are collecting on debts. And by the way, we have a legal obligation to do that.
If you're making so much money from it, why not use human beings rather than robots?
Well, there are... Well, let's be very clear. The first thing that there are nearly 32,000 people in the Department of Human Services and Centrelink. That's number one. Number two, the way that the income assurance system works is that people are initially sent a letter saying we have data matched between different things that are going on, and we want to understand what is happening in your lives so that we can understand whether we have been paying you more or less money than we should have been doing. It goes both ways, by the way.
OK.
And that's what happens.
Cassandra, and I'll come back to our question who's got a hand up in a moment, but Cassandra, go ahead.
Yeah, so this robo-debt system has been in operation now for 3 years, yeah? The government has issued 500,000 alleged debts. And on their own numbers, 1 in 5 of those has been wrong. And that's only been established, though, because people have had the guts, the tenacity to actually finally challenge the debts. We have no idea the number of people on very low incomes, often in very vulnerable circumstances, who have actually paid the money back because either they didn't realise how to challenge it, they were too fearful, all of those things. And we should remember that this is the government debt collection system, right? So first of all, we stripped a lot of the human side out of it. So many of these debts alleged are wrong. And then, as it steamrolls on, government has the extraordinary powers to grab and come after you in a way that no private corporation is allowed to do. This is absolutely an abuse of government power. I'm really stunned, Jason, the government is not taking this far more seriously. We're having reports in the media very regularly now of people being tipped over the edge, cases of people taking their life after receiving this kind of notice. You have to understand what it's like to be on the other side of this as a government, a big government comes after you when you don't know how to navigate that system. And so I really urge you to listen to how inhumane this is. And so many people have been so deeply distressed about it. The journalists have been doing your job. People directly affected have been doing your job, speaking up. I'm just questioning, what will it take for you to really be prepared to scrap this and acknowledge that you've got to get this right?
I'm going to quickly go back to our question because you had a hand up. Is Connell?
2 comments. Not everyone is capable of working. I am. In the past, I wasn't. And not everyone can. And another thing, I read in the media recently that a robo-debt notice was sent to a man who had died 6 months previously. Where are the safeguards? What are you doing for the vulnerable people who are targeted by this? Do you actually care?
I'll go to Katie first because we haven't heard from you on this. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, Labor has said that we should stop this program. We've had too many cases coming to us of people who've been very distressed. You know, I don't know how many debt notices you've seen, Jason, but they're not written in a way that says, hi, we've got a few questions about how you're going. They're actually sent like a bill and they have, you know, you owe this, and then it's, you know, up to you to appeal it or argue it. And certainly from experience I've had in Canberra, just walking around, people coming up to me, very distressed. And then there's obviously been the high-profile media cases of people who are dying or who have died and having claims against them. There's people who are having debts raised from 25 years ago. We've got the situation where in Townsville they've paused the program, presumably in recognition that it's quite distressing for victims of the flood up there. You know, so the government's acknowledged that in Townsville. So I think this really does go to, again, the government working it out, providing the resources that are needed. We have no problem with collecting the money that's due if there have been overpayments. That's part of the system. But, you know, the way it's been run at the moment, the high error rate, the fact that it relies on individuals to argue their case, and in some cases, I've got colleagues in the parliament where 100% of the people that have come to their constituent office have had all of their debts waived, and there's no transparency about that. If you don't appeal and you pay, maybe you shouldn't have. There's just no transparency. So we think the program should be stopped, resources should be provided, and the government needs to get a grip on it.
Zali, a case for crossbench intervention here? I mean, you have intervened on other issues.
We have, and I think as independents on the crossbench, we tend to stand up for wanting probably integrity of process and really transparency and accountability. So it is concerning. Look, I did feel that the minister in question time, and that came up a lot in our last week in Parliament, I did feel that he dealt with it and certainly apologised for the instances that had gone wrong. I think it is a classic case of oversight by robots is probably not the best way to go. At the end of the day, get back to jobs and having real people looking at the facts and the cases. I think, especially when you're talking with highly vulnerable people where an oversight can have really dire consequences. But there is that the mandatory obligation to report and to update your information. So you have to be reasonable as well that this is a system that does require accountability. There has to be a process of debt recovery, but it has to be, I think, a little bit more human and reasonable.
OK, we've got quite a few questions to get to. Remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on QandA, let us know on Twitter. Keep an eye on the RMIT ABC Fact Check and the Conversation website for the results. The next question comes from Terry Jones. Terry.
Both major parties recently joined forces to block a move for an inquiry into allegations of special treatment for Crown Casino by MPs and public servants. I think it's quite clear that there's strong public support for an effective Commonwealth Anti-Corruption Commission with sufficient powers and sufficient teeth to investigate allegations of undue influence by vested interests on decisions made by MPs and public servants. Why are both the major parties so strongly opposed to this? It makes me ask myself the question, what are they trying to hide? Why don't you MPs actually do your job, which is to represent the views of your constituents, who I'm sure would like to see this happen. And if you're not prepared to do that, how else do you expect that the failing public confidence in our political process will ever be restored?
OK, I'm going to start with Zali again, because the independents... So the crossbench were very strong on this in the past week, so I'll start with you, but then we'll hear from the...
Absolutely. We cut a very lonely figure in Parliament, the five of us standing for a motion that, in fact, there be a joint inquiry. Look, it has been reported off for inquiry, but not to a body that has the power to properly investigate if there are any ministerial or any the corruption aspect. I think we've seen in the last 12 to 24 months a number of incidents that have come up where really there is that complete loss of face when it comes to our politics and politicians, and real concerns as to corruption, and there really is a strong need for a National Anti-Corruption Commission. I mean, it just has to be done. We have Cathy McGowan, previous independent member for QandA, put up a proposal. I know the coalition government have come on board with a proposal or flagged that they will bring one on, but it has no teeth, it has no true accountability. It needs to be a National Anti-Corruption Commission that has fully funded, that has the capacity to have public hearings, that it can fully investigate. It can't just be reported by a body. So I think the public wants to know, the Australian people want to know that no one is above the law and that anything can be, that it can be investigated and cleared up. If the allegations are false, then I think it's in everyone's interest that we clear it up. But Crown was a classic example of, come on, what's it going to take?
Just a quick one on this. Because you were in Parliament, so you said you cut lonely figures on the crossbench. And so my question briefly is, do you know why, or do you think you know why, both the major parties had no appetite for an open parliamentary inquiry into this?
Well, we've had both sides of politics in government. We had 6 years of Labor. We're now on a third term of coalition, and no one comes forward with a decent anti-corruption commission. So the real question is,
do you think
why
it's
not?
Specifically about Crown in this case?
Crown, well, look, gambling lobby is pretty powerful. I know both major parties accept political donations from Crown and gambling, so there is a real question of why not.
Okay.
And I certainly don't want to cast aspersions, but if you're not prepared to have it investigated, why not?
Jason.
Yes, Tony. How can I help? I'm
You can have
afraid
an open inquiry into this to start with.
Well, I'm afraid you guys have been misled. The government has referred this to the Australian Law Commission for enforcement integrity. It has powers that a parliamentary committee could never have, and it will investigate these allegations quite clearly with the powers that it possesses. And members of Parliament will be subject to that investigation if those allegations are proven to be upheld. In terms of the government is designing the Commonwealth Integrity Commission. It will have a budget of $107 million. It will look at many of the things that you're talking about, and it will have teeth. We have seen during the week people make claims about members of Parliament being corrupt, but when asked to actually give specifics of that allegation, they're not willing to do so. The biggest thing undermining our politics at the moment is irresponsible allegations without actual proof. And I would say we're sitting in the state of New South Wales at the moment. We have seen the New South Wales Independent Commission Against Corruption essentially become a kangaroo court with show trials. And innocent people, hundreds of innocent people, have had their lives destroyed because this commission went for headlines instead of trying to root out corruption.
But that's rubbish. The model that's been proposed is on the basis of an analysis of all the commissions that are around all the states of Australia. It's not just about what's happened in New South Wales. We have had very good operating bodies in other states, and the proposal from an anti-corruption point of view is actually taking the best of all of our systems, not just New South Wales ICAC.
Sorry, I'm going to go to Katie Gallagher. It does seem to be people are probably getting a glimpse as to how you won that election. Katie.
Well, Labor does support an anti-corruption commission or a body of that type. We went to the election with that policy. In terms of the issues around Crown Casino and the allegations that were raised, we did think that the government's response to have it dealt or have it investigated by the Australian Enforcement Integrity Commission was a good first step. We have left open, based on what that investigation finds, any further action that needs to be done. And indeed, the Senate actually passed a motion, I think on Thursday, to require the Leader of the Government in the Senate to come into the Senate on the next sitting day and explain what the Prime Minister has done in relation to investigating any concerns that have been made about ministers or MPs. No one's been named, as Jason says. There's just been allegations there, but we do want to know whether the Prime Minister has followed this up and what investigations he's asked his department to undertake, whether it's speaking with the people that have made the allegations and come back to the Parliament. So,
why didn't you support, just out of interest, Labor supporter Parliamentary Joint Committee, which was the inquiry, which was what the crossbench were after? They said they felt lonely. Labor clearly wasn't going to join them.
Well, look, I'm in the Senate, so I missed all the excitement in the House. Everyone says the House is the exciting place to be.
I presume you talk to your colleagues.
I do talk to them from time to time. My understanding was, and again, not being there, was that the formation of the committee was not representative of the Parliament. We have 68 members in the House of Reps. There's 6 crossbenchers. There was an over-representation of them on the committee. And look, to be honest, if everyone's seen how parliamentary committees work, they don't necessarily have the powers or the independence that the body that the government has referred it off to has. And we think that is an appropriate first step. I don't think, seriously, that a widely represented crossbench Liberal and Labor politicians on a committee is the right body to investigate nameless allegations about ministers and members of Parliament doing the wrong thing. It's
so
just
nothing to do, just to confirm, nothing to do at all with Labor's historical connections to Crown?
None at all. And look, speaking from personal experience, I've had nothing to do with Crown. It's just two
of the key power brokers from the New South Wales Labor Party,
people who were in the Labor Party years ago have jobs there, but I think it's a bit of a bow to say that implicates the whole of the federal caucus in some conspiracy, because it's simply not correct.
Okay. All right. Our questioner has his hand up. Let's quickly go back.
I was just going to say, doesn't this highlight why we need a decent, proper national anti-corruption commission?
Well, Jason says the government is building one.
What's the smoking gun, though, such a corruption commission?
I want to say to the crossbench that have been doing this work, more power to you. You've also all supported an increase to New Start. More power to you on that. From Bob Catter right through to Adam Band. Sometimes this is about hearing what the community is really saying needs to change. We don't want any more of the Labor, Liberal, it's all about politicking. It's actually, if there are serious allegations...
Let's do precisely that, Cassandra, go back to the community. So our questioner had his hand up.
And if they're not, then they are dismissed.
Just one second, Cassandra, I'll come back to you. Our questioner had his hand up. Okay. Go ahead, Terry.
Look, quite honestly, the response that I got from both the major parties doesn't wash it with me. I mean, if you look back, not just at the Crown business, but you look back at a number of the other things that have come up in, the last few decades, I think the culture of secrecy and lack of transparency in politics in this country has been deteriorating for probably at least 20 years.
Yeah.
And it's got to the point where there are so many transactions that I can run off in the last 12 months that, just to use a phrase that politicians often use, don't pass the pub test, right? Mm. I mean, you look at some of the water buybacks, for example.
And the grasslands.
And you look at the grasslands. I mean,
okay,
I can go on, but anyway.
Well, you could, because you've got a team effort down there, but, which is great. But we're going to throw it back.
She's my political advisor.
That's fantastic.
So, look, can I
quickly
just
round up your point and...
I
we'll
will
go back
round
to
up
that.
my point by saying what all these answers have convinced me, that if we want to see more accountability and transparent in politics, what we need is more independence in Parliament and less party people.
All right. Nothing wrong with the two of you responding, by the way. I wasn't meaning to imply that. Now, Adam, you were talking about no smoking gun. What do you want to say?
Well, look, I think the first point to make is that Australian politics isn't perfect, obviously, but on most indices around the world, we are one of the least corrupt countries, and I just don't see why you would make such a big structural change, basically following on from something that was on 60 Minutes. I mean, that is hardly the reason to change and to introduce a body which is going to be a picnic for lawyers, basically. I mean,
Are you implying
all the judges,
that
all the lawyers
because it
will
was
come
on
out
60 Minutes, it was somehow less
No, well, I'm just saying
relevant as journalism?
No, but this is a huge... but what is being proposed...
Funny you would focus on
What
that.
is being proposed is basically the sort of commission that emerges in countries like Italy and Brazil when there are serious, serious cases of corruption. Basically, a new legal body that comes out with all of these extraordinary powers, and you just can't predict how it's going to behave. Just as Jason said, we've seen in Western Australia and also New South Wales, these entities can basically go feral. They have a lot of power. They can go and search journalists' homes. I mean, if you don't like what happened to the ABC journalist and the News Corp journalist, then you should not be supporting a commission like this, because they can be extremely powerful. Now, we have a parliament and, most importantly, we have a free media. And the free media is definitely the best and the cheapest, I would add.
So do you know any cases of ICAC searching journalists' homes? Because, of course, we know the federal police have been doing that.
But as I understand the proposal that has been put forward by the crossbench, that such a commission could actually do that. If
OK, well, Zali better respond to that briefly.
I think that the basis of the commission that's being put forward is being proposed by a number of eminent retired Supreme Court judges.
Of course, the legal profession. Of course they want this. Because
with due respect,
helps
what
lawyers.
is it going to take? I mean, you've got the Great Barrier Reef, $440 million of Australian taxpayers being allocated without tender or proper process. $420 million to Paladin Group. We've got the $80 million in the Eastern Australia agriculture. We've got appointments of politicians and ministers and staffers to the AAT. We have no process of review. There is no accountability.
But we have a police force in every state. We have the federal police. We have so many different crime commissions. Plus, we have a free media, which has brought all of these things to attention. And of course, we have other MPs as well who have a hugely powerful incentive to rat on the other side. And so I just
the free media doesn't have the power to compel testimony, which is one of the things these.
But we have no shortage of royal
do.
commissions in this country. I mean, we have more royal commissions than any other country on earth by far. And so, if something really bad does,
The suggestion here is effectively a standing royal commission to look at the integrity of government.
Well, yes, and I just think that is a big step into the unknown for a country which is as clean as Australia compared to others.
Oh, I can't go back to you. We've got to go to another question. We've got to move on. Next question is from Felicity Rafferty.
Hi, panel. Liberal Party staffers are complaining of sexual harassment. We've got the Minister for Women in the last government resigning as a result of difficulties juggling her Canberra portfolio with her domestic responsibilities. In the current House of Representatives, there are 11 of 44 Liberal MPs are women. Are Liberal women in Parliament expected to toe the party line? That is to say that there's nothing to see here, just as Adam Goodes was expected, as an Aboriginal football legend and Australian of the Year, to keep quiet about the prejudice that he faced. Jason.
Absolutely not. There are a couple of things you missed out there. For example, we have a record number of women in Cabinet now. I've sat through 2 weeks of first speeches in the House of Representatives, and the diversity of the new members that have come in for the Liberal Party, both in terms of background, experience, skills and gender, is quite extraordinary.
What's your percentage of women?
I can't tell you off the top of my head, sorry. 36% apparently. Okay. So, thank you, Cassandra.
It's about...
I don't think it is, yeah.
And we're ranked about 48th globally in terms of being low. Yeah, in the Parliament.
Yeah.
It's low.
Jason, can I just ask you, these abuse claims from these women, do they tell you something about the culture of the party? Because they're suggesting there's some kind of misogynist culture within the party.
Well,
does that worry you?
Yeah, that does worry me. It does worry me from the perspective that we are a broad-based political party without the sort of institutional support that other parties have. So we rely on members joining our party. We rely on them being active. And if there is a culture where certain people feel that they're unwelcome or that they're not, or we don't want them involved, that's a massive problem for us.
Or that they're being shut up when they
or
have
they're being
abuse
shut
claims.
up. Exactly.
How disturbing is that?
So the abuse claim is really disturbing, but I think Katie and look, any member of a political party would say political parties are not set up to deal with claims of sexual abuse. That is the purview of the police, and rightfully so, because they're very serious claims. Where there is a problem with environments in which people don't feel comfortable being there, that's a problem that we have to face up to, and one that the federal executive faced up to on Friday, and it's an ongoing project.
Sandra, you obviously want to respond. Keep it brief if you wouldn't mind.
I do. Jason, I don't think it is correct to say that a political party has no role here. I mean, no corporation, no employee anywhere else would get away with saying that. In fact, the codes of conduct, the expectations around the responsibility of an employer to ensure that if there is an allegation of this kind of conduct, that the employer does all things reasonably within their power to ensure that that person is supported, that they feel able to bring forth that complaint, for you to take action to investigate it, including to support them to go to the police if they choose to do that. This is an environment in where it's very difficult for a person to pursue that on their own. For no other employer, and when they do, if you pursue it legally, you get in big trouble to just go, oh, not our job, you go off and tell the police about it. The employer has a responsibility to support that person right through the process.
OK, Tony, I'm sorry. I need to be clear. I'm talking about the difference between harassment and sexual abuse. One is a criminal act. In the two women that came forward, one has said that she was supported in going to the police and she decided that she didn't want to go to the police. I don't know what more you believe the Liberal Party could have done in that particular instance, but we have a
Should you root out a culture of harassment and make sure that the people who are doing it are not members anymore?
Where there is harassment of anyone, on any basis, they will, let me be very clear, root it out and expelled from the Liberal Party.
So what do you think about the notion that someone went to one of these women and said, how would you feel if this person was put up for pre-selection?
I'm absolutely appalled that
the person who did this to you.
That is absolutely appalling. And I honestly, if that hadn't been put on the record, I would tell you there's no way that would have happened.
So are the people responsible, have they been rooted out?
Well, in that particular instance, there are ongoing inquiries, and I believe if that person is discovered and the person making that allegation is willing to identify that person, yes, they will be rooted out. OK,
I'll quickly go back to our question. Felicity, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I guess the feeling that I have with regarding how women are meant to feel within Liberal Party ranks is that it's OK if you just go about being nice little ladies, but if you stick your head up above the parapet and say we have a problem here, that's just not on.
So I guess I need to say to that, and I know you're not meaning to be that way, but that is highly offensive to my female colleagues in the parliament, and none of them are like that. None of them will put up with the sort of nonsense that has been described in the media. We have a very strong culture of empowering people regardless of their gender. OK, I've got to ask you this, Ali. Does it make you think twice about even the possibility of joining the Liberal Party?
I'm a proud independent.
Yeah. Will you remain a proud independent? It's one of the questions. We got a lot of questions along those lines. Do you intend to remain a proud independent throughout your time in Parliament, or is there any chance you could join the Liberal Party?
Look, I've answered this question a lot. The irony is, on one day I get asked or assumed that I'm going to defect to the Liberal Party, and another day I'm a Labor stooge and a get-up activist, and then I've got a Green staffer, and then I've got everything. So I think a lot of people have trouble.
You're saying you wouldn't fit in the Liberal Party?
People just have trouble categorising what an independent is, and ironically, I think it's the truest form of representation of your electorate, because I'm not beholden to a party line. I'm beholden to my electorate, and I've made it clear I am there to represent my electorate as an independent, and that's what I'm doing. But what I find interesting with the question, for example, on this issue is, are our political parties only kind of starting to come to terms with the expectations that all our corporations have had to deal with for a long time already, from a legal point of view, from a quotas, equity, proper representation, more diversity within the parties? How do they deal with sexual abuse complaints or discrimination? And I feel like in the corporate world, it all happened some time ago. Not perfect, still a long way to go, but it's a process. Maybe the political parties are sort of a bit late to the party of getting on with this.
I'm going to bring Katie in, and so Adam wants to get in as well.
Just briefly on the corporate point, I mean, do we really have any evidence that things are so much better in the corporate world? I mean, I would say from first principles that, I mean, our politicians are under far more scrutiny than people in the corporate world because of the media attention. And so if they step up once, their entire career is over. Whereas that is not the case in the corporate world. So I just think this kind of constant beating up on politicians because of so-called cultural reasons just ignores that these things can be just as bad in the corporate world, but we just don't focus on it.
Adam, we're talking about our political leaders here and the Australian Parliament.
Yeah.
Surely we should be saying, you would want, Jason, for you to set the standard. That's what we're after here.
But these,
Katie, I'm going to bring you in before we run out of time. Go ahead.
Look, I think the first thing to say is that, the political parties have to deal with this, and it has been an issue that I think we see. Certainly there's been issues in the Greens party from time to time. I'm sure the Labor Party is not perfect. The Labor Party isn't the employer of staffers. I think that's the only point I'd add to Jason's, is when the staffer, if they're employed in a political office, they do have an employer, and that employer has obligations which, so those staff do have, support. I would have to say, though, in terms of the stuff that's been going on in the Liberal Party, it's unusual, but I'd like to support the words that Jason has said. I think he's been quite outspoken, and politics is still a male-dominated profession, and I think I've been in politics for 20-odd years. Women have had to fight to have systems put in place that support their involvement in political parties. In the Labor Party, there's more of us. We've probably been a bit more shouty, and we've got the policies in place. We have other support networks that are women's groups within the party that support that. But, the Federal Caucus, we're 46% female now. It's, the boys are starting to look around and what's happening here. But I would say that, we need men like Jason who are going to say that what happened, the allegations that have been in the paper are wrong, shouldn't happen, because that will bring forward cultural change within political parties, because it's not so simple as just having a policy. It is actually changing culture, and that's where you need leaders to actually stand up and say it's not okay, this is the way we're going to do things. And, I think credit where credit's due. OK,
we're going to move on. Completely different subject. Garonwy Price has a question for us. Go ahead.
Yes. In Canada and the United States, there are many small entrepreneurial companies now pioneering nuclear batteries. In effect, nuclear batteries, small-scale power plants. These can be powered by thorium, and they have several benefits, one of which is thorium and molten salts. They cannot melt down. They do not convert to plutonium, so they can't be weaponized, and they potentially could be produced in factories, so they're many, many times cheaper than conventional power plants.
Are they using them anywhere?
There are applications in Utah now. So they're just coming off the line. There's none, as far as I know, actually installed, but there's one that's being approved currently. The idea is that after you've built them, after you've made them, it can be buried. They're very small. You bury it. It's a sealed system, and then you take it away 25 years later. A small unit in my back garden in Warringah would have enough to power the electorate for 25 years, and then it could be taken away, assuming the body corporate would allow.
Would you be happy to? You're obviously a member of Zali's electorate. Would you be happy to have one in your electorate?
Certainly, I'd be happy to have one in my back garden. I'd be happy to have one. You could put one under the quarantine station on North Head.
Okay.
They are safe. There's a major nuclear power plant in the suburbs of Toronto. I think we have a unreasonable fear of nuclear energy.
OK, let's go to Zali first, because it's your electorate. Can you imagine this? Because you want zero emissions. It's critical for climate change in your way of looking at it. So why not think about the new generation of thorium nuclear reactors as a way of doing this?
Look, again, we have to find the solutions. We need to go towards a zero emission, and there's no doubt that we have to investigate all the options. We do know renewables are the cheapest source as it stands, and my understanding is nuclear has a cost element. But look, the Energy Minister has just referred to the committee on which I am. We will be investigating.
Do you feel agnostic about the source of power? For example, a form of nuclear power which was cleaner than traditional nuclear power, like thorium batteries that he's referring to. Would you be prepared to go into that with an open mind?
Well, I think we have a duty to investigate all possibilities. The question, though, is there's a lot of factors that need to be looked at. And I think at the end of the day, there's also social acceptance is a big part of it. It has to be acceptable to the community. I'm not sure how the rest of Warringah would feel about your proposal. And you have to weigh it up with what else alternatives are available. And look, the beauty is that's what can be investigated. And I do have an open mind in terms of looking at it.
Okay.
Personally, I do feel that there is a duty to find the safest, cheapest source of power.
All right, let's go to Jason, because Angus Taylor has suggested that we need another inquiry. There was one, the Zwitkowski inquiry during John Howard's time. That was, of course, before these kind of thorium reactors even existed.
Well, they still don't quite exist yet, but they're a long further down the line. Look, I agree with Zali. We need to have an open mind on different power sources that are available, in particular ones that don't produce greenhouse gas emissions. I think the issue with renewable energy is that whereas a coal-fired power station or a gas turbine can create electricity permanently or in a dispatchable sense, you need to combine renewable energy with batteries, and that's what sends the economics of that right out of whack. So when you put that into the equation, what you end up with is a nuclear reactor becomes quite cost-effective in comparison.
And so do you feel that's a good way to go? A lot of your colleagues are now talking openly about this as a possibility.
Once again, I'm going to keep an open mind. It's part of an inquiry. I don't think that I should, on Q&A, reach a conclusion.
Is Angus Taylor going down the right path here, opening up an inquiry? Well, John Howard had one, an extensive one, and decided it was too expensive, would take too long, and too many political obstacles.
So that was 12 years ago. A lot has changed. And yes, I think we need to explore all options.
Tony, time is ticking. You know, we have the
talking about the program or the planet?
Available to us, the climate crisis.
Okay, right.
Actually, last time I checked, it's not like we've got forever to think about these things. We don't. You know, here we have...
You're in favour, are you? You're in favour of nuclear?
Why are we investigating something? Could maybe, when we absolutely know we've got the best technology in terms of renewables, we should be getting behind and investing in that as rapidly as we can.
Renewables are never going to achieve it. I mean, if we want to get to zero carbon, I mean, the overwhelming bulk of Australia's energy still comes from gas and coal, and yet we focus every day in the media on these so-called renewables. I mean, even if you look at the Western world, they are still single-digit percentages. No, they are single-digit percentage contribution. I mean, it's just so absurd that we are the only country in the G20 with a complete ban on nuclear energy. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. We have a third of the world's uranium.
Can we just be clear about one thing? They're not so-called renewables, they are renewables.
Sure, but they still... No, but it creates the impression that they're free. Like, sure, the marginal cost is free at some times of the day. Indeed, on the 22nd of July, it was for the first time. The marginal cost of energy was free, and everyone's like, oh, wow, free power. But, you know, what's going to happen at night time? I mean, you still need power at night time, and everyone says, oh, well, you know, there'll be battery technology. But that's just assuming that the rate of progress in battery technology will just continue upward and upward forever, and that it's just all going to work out perfectly. The reality is, on current technology, there is no way that with solar and wind and hydro, you will get to zero emissions. We absolutely need nuclear. I mean, I just came back from Chicago. I spent 3 months there. And in the state of Illinois, they have 10 nuclear power stations, 10. And the cost of electricity there is a third what it is in New South Wales. 1/3, and then in France as well, I think they have something like 30 nuclear power stations. Their power is much cheaper than
I
this.
don't want to.
So all this business about it being so expensive
I don't want to
is just
see
wrong.
nuclear in this country. And Sally, do you want?
But why?
This reality.
I mean, Chernobyl was built in the 70s.
We've got available to us renewable energy sources that we should be absolutely investing.
But the battery technology is not there.
As quickly as we can. If we're worried about energy bills, there's a bundle of things that we can do. We know people on low incomes, all the solutions that are
People on
available.
low incomes,
Energy
power bills have
efficiency.
gone up about 100% in a
Get
decade.
all the houses
That's
around
terrible
the country
for people on low
actually
Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do
being on
here. I'm just
solar.
going to say, hang on a sec. I'm going to say,
But we're
you
now
need to
going
speak.
into another review.
Hang on a sec, Cassandra. You need to speak
Well,
independently of each other. So
We're very good at reviewing.
okay, you're both talking over each other. So, Cassandra, finish your point. And I'm going to go back to you, Adam, because it does take a long time to build a nuclear reactor. They are very expensive, and that's what Switkowski found. There'll be a 30-year time period to actually get one up. That's going back then. Have you looked into this now? How long would it take to build even one in Australia?
Well, certainly the technology has improved a lot since that review. But as I understand it, our various emissions targets do relate to 20, 30 years into the future. So we do have to act now if we're going to do this. They do take a long time to build, but there are smaller modular ones that are being developed. I mean, the state of Ontario in Canada is now 60% nuclear. So, you know, we really do have to act now. I mean, I'm not for a review. I think the major parties have to get together. They have to agree. I mean, it really is so disappointing that Labor's come out and basically poo-pooed this idea because it's not in the national interest, really, to say this.
Let's hear what Labor says. Go ahead.
Yeah, so our view is this is, well, yet another review. We don't believe that Angus Taylor is genuine about this. I think this is him distracting from the rather difficult month he's had in politics and also the fact that they've had 15 failed energy policies in the last 6 years. You know, my feedback from the community when I'm talking to people is they want to get on now. Picking up Cassandra's point, they want action now. They want a national energy policy now that the government has failed to deliver and, you know, we've lost prime ministers over. And this is something that has been tested before the Australian community a number of times since 1950 and has been rejected every single time. You know, the view of, I think, the people I represent is, you know, first believe climate change is real, that it's happening and that we need a policy to deal with it. And that's something that this government in 3 terms and 6 years hasn't been able to deliver.
If nuclear energy was safe, would you still be against it?
Well, I think there's issues around nuclear energy. It's about the location, it's about the use of water, it's about the cost, it's about the length of time to construct, it's the construction period and the emissions throughout that. I mean, there's a whole range of issues that have to be looked at if you were genuine about it. But, you know, it is, I think, saying, oh, we're going to do all this busy work over here about something that might happen in 30 years, but actually what's happening now and what people want to see now is action happening now.
We do already have
Yes, but this would be a new one.
We're running out of time rapidly.
This would be a new one.
You can, Garomwe, you had a very long question, but you can make a very short...
No one's saying don't use renewables, don't use storage, but climate change is an emergency. Here we are, it's like we're going to war and leaving our tanks and our artillery and our aircraft back in the hangar and saying we can't use them. Nuclear power works. The countries that are producing all their energy emissions-free, like France, Sweden, Ontario, it's all done with nuclear power and some renewables.
All right, Adam, I think you made your point for you, so we'll move on. In 3 weeks' time, we'll have Q&A's 2019 high school special when senior high school students join the panel to discuss Australia's future with today's politicians. So we want Australia's political leaders to meet the leaders of tomorrow. So head to our website and upload your audition video. Our next question comes from Hallie McGree.
A recent survey showed that 1 in 8 men believed they could win a point off Serena Williams in a game of tennis. Do you believe these results would be different if the subject of the survey was a top male tennis player? And do you think that this shows sexism is still prevalent in sport?
Sally, I'll start with you, put you on the downhill and let you go.
Good luck anyone taking a point off Serena Williams is all I can say. She's powerful, she's absolutely fantastic. Look, sexism does still exist, there's no doubt about it, but you have to tackle it head on, and it's girls like you, it's the next generation that have to do it. we all do our bit. It's why I'm here. It's why I stood for Parliament this year. I thought it was really important that we needed more women in Parliament, more representation. I've come up across sexism, whether it's been my sporting career, legal, at various times. You have to call it out and you have to stand your ground. So. Yeah, sport is it's a tricky one, but you just have to go for it. I think the growth in women's sport has been fantastic. I think back to 20 years ago, we had a handful of individual sportswomen that could get a few sponsors and you could get yourself enough profile to survive in sport. Now we have leagues, we have sports. We need to see pay equity. We need to see the women's teams getting the same pay as the guys. But at least they're starting to get a little bit more recognition and coverage, and I think often much better to watch.
I must say I'm a bit surprised about this question because it was 1974, I think, when Bobby Riggs challenged Billie Jean King, and it seemed that question seems a bit of a throwback to that weird time. I thought we might have advanced a little further than that.
Yeah, and look, it's one of those things, you're not comparing apples with apples. They're different, often different sports. It's not a question of saying, well, is a guy stronger than a woman, and so is that a test of strength? It's about, you've got different sports. You know, you don't ask a 100-metre sprinter to run the 10K and say, well, one's a better athlete than the other. They're doing different sports. And so I think male and female sport needs to be respected and recognised and celebrated for what it is. And that's up to the public to really let everyone know what they want to see and what they want to watch. You know, I've got boys and girls at home. I want them all to participate in sport. I encourage the kids from the electorate. I want everyone to get out there and get active.
I'd like to throw that around to everybody, but I'm told we're out of time. So that is all we have time for tonight. Please thank our panel, whether they're going to play tennis or not: Cassandra Goldie, Jason Falinski, Zali Stegel, Katie Gallahan, Adam Crichton. Thank you very much.